recording. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to show you how I know this. Right, that one, I think. No, I'll take that one. No, that one. So this is a game, hang on, here we go. This is a game from 2 years ago. Okay, so it doesn't matter who it is. I'm just going to choose a random team. I'm going to choose Conqueror. And obviously I've got access to this. I don't know whether you guys do have, but I'm going to go and have a look at their activities in Q1. And I can see here whether on the right-hand side, you can see things that they viewed. Okay, and here is the last thing they actually saved in the game, which was submit. So I know that team has submitted. What some teams have done is they've submitted and then they've withdrawn that submission, but not resubmitted. Okay, so you will get, somebody yesterday sent me an email, which was very helpful actually, that said, this screenshot that I've got saying your decisions are in, does that mean to say that we've submitted? Yes, it does. So you will get a screenshot that comes up saying your decisions are in. That means you're done. Okay, so obviously for those teams who got $200,000 fine, don't do it again, because you just get fined double, and that will hurt. Okay, right, that's the bollockings over. Okay, so Q2 is a little bit more complicated, but not a great deal more complicated. And you've got until Friday at 5 p.m. to get your decisions in. That's plenty of time. Tomorrow afternoon, we'll have another one of those kind of Q&A lectures for anybody that's got any last minute questions. But don't forget, what we're not going to answer is, should I do this or should I do that? That's down to you. But what we can answer is the questions that start with how, or maybe why. You know, why would I want to do this? So as to where you have your factory, as to where you have your first sales office, that's entirely up to you. Okay, but we can show you how to do that. So would somebody mind, given that there's virtually no difference between your teams at this point in time, it would be really helpful if I could use one of your games as an example to show how to do stuff. Is anybody happy for me to do that? Otherwise, I'm more than happy. What's your team name? Halo, right, okay. Yep. Let's just have a look. What game are you? What game? Do you know what game number? Okay, don't worry, I'll find it. Company name, Halo. Thank you for that. That makes it easier because I can't show you the full picture from a game that's already finished. There we go. Oh, did you realize? And now I imagine that very few of you have got totally unique company names, which is absolutely fine. There was a game called Halo about 3 years ago. I'm just saying, okay? Anyway, so that's yours. You're probably thinking, who cares? I don't really care. It's just that no matter how different you try and be, somebody's already probably got there a couple of years ago. Right, okay, so Halo. So this is what you should be able to see. I'm just going to check whether my remote students can see this because, no, I thought not. Just give me 1 second. I'm just going to share that particular screen. Okay. And I'm now going to just check to see whether there's anybody that can stuff up my lecture. There shouldn't be, but there may be. Oh yeah, 3 people. Okay. Just give me 1 second. Now this lecture won't last 2 hours, I'm sure. It can do if you want me to be here for 2 hours, but I doubt it will, because once you understand what you need to do, then go away and do it, right? You've got plenty of time. You may have lectures straight after this, in which case you've got a bit of time to start discussing some of the kind of finer details. Okay, so this quarter is called Setup Shop, which is basically, you've got a pile of cash, you've got some market research, now you've got to start building stuff, all right, which is easy, just a click of a button. So setting up shop means 2 things, building your factory and setting up or building at least 1 sales office. We'll come to that. Just a couple of things before we go any further. Firstly, I said to you yesterday that you really need to change your password, because if you don't, somebody can work out what your login is, log in as you, and completely mess up somebody else's game or your game. So if I were you, I would go to the account button in the top right hand corner, and again, I can't see what you can see because obviously I'm not a student, but there should be an option there to be able to change your password and maybe your login as well. If you change your login, don't change it to your UEA login like p.barrow, because the chances are, if that login's already been used in previous games, it won't allow you to use it. So choose a personal email, okay? And password whatever you want. But if you come to me and say somebody appears to have logged into my game and changed some stuff, and I say, well, have you changed your password? No, I forgot. Sorry, but I can't do anything about that, okay? Anyway, so that's that one. The textbook, somebody asked me where the textbook chapters were. They're there, where it says textbook. Micro simulations we mentioned, well, on Monday. And at the moment, you should only have 2 options there. So don't do them now, but have a look at those. Okay, it's kind of nice, easy introduction to some of the concepts that you'll be introduced to. And at the moment, the only one that you really need is product design. And that is how to match the needs that we'll see on the screen with the market research and what you actually put in your brands. Okay, so that's what this is. Sorry, what that is. They use the example of bikes, but the principle is exactly the same. Right, I think that's it. Okay, right, first things first, the deposit account. I know some of you, excuse me, some of you hadn't put money into the deposit account. That's absolutely fine. There was no need to do that. But I'm going to show you, for those of you who did, what you need to do to move that money back into your cash account, which is where you're going to spend it. Okay? Now you can see this team here, in that top right-hand corner, it's got ending cash, and that says what's currently in their cash account, and that would be their interest, probably $27,000, plus $1 million that they get in this quarter from the investors. But they're still missing 900,000 or 912,000 that they would have invested. So the first thing I'm going to do is to go to finance, go down to certificate of deposit, okay? And this is what they've currently got in there. They've got 912,000, but obviously if we want to spend some of that, we can always put some more back in at the end. So what I'm going to do is click modify, and then put the amount that I want, which is 912,000. Okay, and I'm going to save it, and you'll see that figure in the top right-hand corner change to reflect that money that's just gone in. Okay, so that's the first thing you ought to do. If you try and spend money that is in that deposit account, you're going to meet Guido. Okay, so don't do that. Okay, right, so let's go back to the beginning. Just check and make sure we've got any more. Yeah, we have got a couple more people that have joined us. Let me just make them. And Alfonso has joined us online.
Hello, Pat.
Hi, Alfie. So I've changed everybody to be a participant. If you could just monitor that, that would be great.
We'll do it,
Okay.
Pat.
Okay. Okay, so industry news. So you've seen that graph before, and all that tells you is that the kind of buoyancy of the economy goes in cycles. Just to remind you, what that doesn't mean is in quarter 6, the demand will be as low as quarter 2. It won't be. It won't be anywhere near as low as that. All it means is that there'll be a kind of increase in demand particularly in quarter 3 and quarter 4 and quarter 7 and quarter 8, but the demand will continue to rise. But you may see a slight decrease in the increase of demand in, let's say, quarter 5 and quarter 6. Anyway, we'll come back to that later on. On the right-hand side are the economic trends for the 5 regions. Now, you might say, why are those 2 there, which happen to be Latin America and Asia Pacific? Why are they much higher than the other three? It's because they're better places to have your sales office. No, it's only because if you put all 5 lines together, you couldn't see which was which. Okay, but you can see the kind of the sharpness of the incline here tell you that the projection is probably slightly better for this one here, which is North America, and everything else appears to be sort of going up at a reasonable rate. So it looks like the economy in America at the moment is slightly better than elsewhere. Okay. Now, if you look at the news here, which changes every quarter, and again, ignore what happens out there because it doesn't have any resemblance to what happens here, you'll see some information about projections for the economy and exchange rates and stuff. So these will change. And what you have to deal with in this game is a lot of uncertainty. So of course, you don't have the ability to make fully rational decisions. Now, rational decisions are the thing which Tony Polat will talk about next week. And that is something that you'll need to think about for your coursework. When you make decisions, do you have full information? Almost certainly no. There are very few fully rational decisions in this game. Most of what you have to take are non-rational decisions. And one of the things you've got to start thinking about is, okay, given the sort of decision it is, how do people make such decisions? In reality, a lot of people make what we call intuitive decisions. They don't really know what the best decision to take would be, but they have this kind of gut feel. And that's a lot more prevalent than you'd expect in industry. Okay, so some of the time you might say, I don't know what the best decision is. But the point is, once you finish the game, you can reflect on what you did and then say maybe what you should have done and why. So as an example, now you all get the same news, okay? At least in the same game. I don't know whether the games have different news, different games have different news. So for instance, if you look at something like Europe, it might say that, well, it says here, Eastern Europe is struggling to get out of the recession and its skilled, lower wage employment base is attracting foreign investments. What does that mean? Well, it probably means that someone like Warsaw might not be a particularly good place to have a sales office, for instance, yet. So you might look at this and say, where do I think I should have my factory? Where do I think I should have my sales office, my first sales office? Or maybe my first 2 sales offices. All I would say is there's never been any situation in this game where the economic or the political situation in a country has stopped a factory or a sales office from working. Really, I don't think this stuff matters as much as you think it probably does. What matters is how good your brands are. Okay, so this is really as much a marketing module as it is anything else. Okay, have a look at this, continue to look at this every quarter. It will give you an idea of where things are going. But as I said, the steepness of those lines there indicate how buoyant and a particular economy is in that part of the world. Okay, so accounting for last quarter is simply what happened in quarter 1. Okay, so you'll just see a very, very simple summary. I mean, when it comes to more complicated accounting statements, you should be able to click on some of these numbers and see where they come from. So for instance, in this case, you've got marketing research, so that's obvious. Where you've got something like advertising, you might click on that number and it might tell you, well, that was regional advertising, that was local advertising, so it gives you more of a breakdown. Okay, but again, you do not need to be an accountant to understand this kind of stuff. I think I've failed every single accounting module I ever took except for one, and I still understand this. Okay, mind you, it was a management accounting one that I passed, but nevertheless, it's still quite straightforward. And the same for cash flow and balance sheet. Okay, so you can see things like retained earnings. Well, retained earnings is going to look awful because, of course, we're spending more than we're generating in terms of revenue. So don't worry about that. That will get better as the game goes on. So the other thing we've got to not worry about, but think about, and for some reason the game's a little bit inconsistent on this, is have we got our next $1 million investment, which should come in automatically. Now I know that the team I've looked at here, Halo, have, because I can see it they've got 1,925,000. I'm just going to whiz forward and just show you how to make sure that you do have that million, and if you don't, what to do to get it. Okay? So I'm going to just go down to pro forma accounting, and I'm going to go to cash flow. And I can see that at the moment, Q2 has no activity at all because we haven't done anything. But if I go down here, I should see that $1 million appear next to increase in common stock, which effectively is investment money. If you've got 0 against that, okay, I'll just get rid of that. There should be at the bottom, for some reason I can't see it, a button that says modify, a button that says load data, and a button that says save. All you do is click modify, click load data, click save, and that $1 million should appear. Okay? For some reason, I don't know why some teams do and some teams don't. It's fine. You all get the million. It's just that for some reason the software does what software does, which is what it feels like doing at any given time. All right? So just, you know, accept that. Okay, so let's go on to marketing research. So I showed you this on Monday, but let's go through it again. So the market research is for the entire world, okay? And marketing research is available for every subsequent quarter except this one, because you don't need any more. This is enough for the next 2 quarters. So the first thing it's going to say to you is customer needs. And I talked about this. So for each of these segments, and of course it depends on what you decide to start building, okay? It does say, the game does say, choose 2 segments to start building. You don't have to, you could just do 1. Okay, so you might say, well, I'm going to choose a cost cutter and I'm going to choose innovator and I'm going to design 1 of each. Or you could say, I'm going to design 2 cost cutters, but different ones. I'm going to experiment and see what happens if I put that component in and not that component into that one, what the reaction is. That's actually as good a way of learning about how good your brands are or what works as anything else. Okay? So these numbers, the higher the number, the more important that issue is on the left-hand side to that segment. So let's have a look. I'm going to look at Workhorse. So what's most important to Workhorse customers is peace of mind, safe, secure, no hassle. Second most important, easy to use, etc., etc. And if you look down below here, you should see a summary of the top 10 issues for each of those segments. Okay? Now, actually, as I said on Monday, how you decide what that actually means in terms of, well, okay, it's peace of mind, safe, secure, no hassle. What do I do? What do I put in there to satisfy that? 2 things I'd say. 1, it's not immediately obvious, which is why that micro simulation is important to look at, because it will explain the concept of it. And secondly, if it is available, it may not be available yet until you start investing money in R&D. That's research and development. So what you might get is what we got when I was at school. The very first Apples came out, and it was very basic. Right? Can't do, obviously, anything like it can do now. So you just have to accept the fact that some of these things may not be satisfied at this stage in the game. Okay? So what I wouldn't be looking for in Workhorses is portability. That's the ability to carry it around with me. Can connect to Office on the road, so that's probably some kind of networking facility. So really, just give them what they want. Don't give them what they don't want, because they actually won't like it. It's not that they'll like the bits you do give them, but they'll hate the bits that you give them that they don't want even more. And you'll get a bad response from them. Okay? So that's the customer needs and wants. So whatever your segment is, then look at these and just click on the arrow and it will actually give you a kind of a ranking of those. When you choose your segment, what I would say, but you don't have to, you don't have to take notice of what I say here. Mercedes and innovators are going to be very difficult to satisfy in these early stages. But it doesn't mean to say that you can't start building. If you do start building, what you're going to get is towards the end of the game, at the final check, you're going to get a response from what's called I think it's the consumer union, like a kind of trade body that looks after the interests of the consumer, who will say to you, you do realize they're going to think your brands are rubbish, okay? Because you almost certainly won't be able to reach a certain level of satisfaction. I'll explain that in a bit. So you can ignore that. All it's saying is, hey, knock yourself out. Go and sell to Mercedes customers. Just don't expect a very good response. You've also got to think about the use pattern. So what do these people use it for? So again, Workhorse. Let's do that one. So they want word processing. They want some kind of accounting software. They want, well, apparently they do want some kind of network facility. So maybe you've got to determine the difference between that network that they want and the stuff that people who take their PC with them on the road would want. There's clearly a difference. So, and I'll show you how to start designing a brand and maybe think about putting some of these things in. Now, obviously, the more things you put in, the more expensive it is to produce. And you may not make as much money now as you'd like to, but it's fine. Nobody expects you just to make much profit. You will, probably, but nobody expects anything great. The more you start building, the bigger volume of items you start building in your factory, the cost of production goes down, the more money you make. Okay, so clearly, if I start putting computer-aided design manufacturing software in Workhorse, they're not going to like it, okay? So that's what that's all about. Price willing to pay. So clearly, Mercedes customers are willing to pay a lot more because they tend to be your kind of richer execs than your cost cutter, people like you and me who can't afford much. So these prices are only a guide. Don't forget your market research is not completely accurate. And the only way you're going to learn about what the actual price is to say, let's go for it. Let's just say, I'm going to sell a cost cutter in Chicago, and I'm going to choose a price of 2183, because that's what I'm told they want to pay. Let's see what the reality is. So you're not going to get this right. You really aren't. And that's fine. You do it by experimenting and finding out. Of course, the price is going to change over time. Okay, so you'll get a sense of what that means when you start looking at some of the market research, and I'll show you after we finished all these bits about this quarter how it might look. Market potential, just to remind you, this is in total over a 4-quarter period. So here, the Mercedes in Los Angeles, the market research reckons there's probably a sort of sales potential of 2853 for the next 4 quarters. That's the next year, okay? But that's not just for you. That's for anybody that happens to be in that market, and that's a maximum. And there's no way your factory is going to be able to produce anywhere near this in the early stages. So as an example, if I said, what Workhorse in Chicago, Los Angeles, for instance, 4369, if I sold 200 in that first quarter, which is next quarter, I will be doing well. This is where people start to get a bit lost. They say, oh, no, we're brilliant. We're going to sell loads. To which I'd say, A, how do you know? Because you've got no idea of how good your brand is. And B, no, you won't. Okay? So just accept the fact that you might have to be a little bit conservative in the early stages. Okay, that's market potential. You'll notice that in some regions, the demand is lower. Okay, it doesn't mean to say it's not worth going in there. It just means to say that probably everybody's going to pile Europe and North America, because they always do. Because that's where the big numbers are. But the big number divided by, let's say, 4 teams might be smaller than 1 team going into somewhere in the Middle East where the demand appears to be lower. Just bear that in mind. Okay, I've mentioned about this on Monday, but again, and this is something you don't have to worry about just yet. This is just telling you how much it will cost to hire your average salesperson and your average factory worker. Okay, so yes, salary, you have to pay salary, unfortunately.
But you should also be thinking about what else that they care about. Because again, one of the components of the game is how satisfied your workforce is. Okay, you get a score of 100. If you get a score of 100, they are absolutely fully satisfied. They're delighted to work for you. If they get a score of 70, they're thinking, I wonder if I can go and join another team. So you might have to think about increasing not just the salary to get them to work harder, but health benefits, vacation, and pension. So typical Americans, they give a week's holiday. You know, really? In this country, well, I get 6. You probably get 3 or 4 when you start work. But again, you might think, well, what can I do to motivate them? And these numbers at the bottom here, the 87, the 84, 72, and 70, is the relative importance of these components to the workforce. So they care less about pensions than they do about salary. They care less about vacation than they do about health benefits. So as I said, that's something that you just got to think about, not now, but when you start hiring workers next quarter. And the same for your factory worker. Okay, same principle. Okay, so the next thing is your goals and strategy. Now, this is something that it's, again, something that you should be thinking about, but the chances are it's going to change over the next few quarters as you decide that what you started doing doesn't work and you want to start rethinking. So you could say, right, you've got to say what your target segments are, just so you can tell the game you've thought about it. I'm going to just do this, I'm going to remove it afterwards, okay? So I'm going to say, right, well, I'm going to write my mission statement, which is something that you guys come up with completely by yourself. We are going to go for high volume, low profit in the following markets, okay? Just so everybody remembers what you agreed. And I'm going to say, for instance, well, my first priority is cost cutter. My second priority is workhorse. At the moment, nothing else is a priority. Those are the 2 things I'm going to focus on. And then you can tick these boxes again, just to remind yourself of what it was that your team agreed. Okay, next quarter, you might come in and say, right, well, stuff cost cutters, that was a disaster. We're going to move to innovators, in which case you can just modify this. Okay, so I'm just going to cancel that. Okay. Okay, fair enough. Apparently, I don't know whether this is what they put in or just this comes up. Global domination. Seems fair enough. You know, crush your enemies, grind them into the dust. Good strategy. So that's kind of introductory stuff. Okay. Now the marketing research, just to remind you, you do not get an option to buy any more this quarter because what you've got is enough. Next quarter, you can start buying market research by region. But as I said, I'll remind you of that. If I were you, if you can afford it, I would buy it in every region. Now, clearly, if you do that, there may be some things that you then can't afford to do elsewhere. But it's important to see what's going on. And if you see a team, let's say in Asia Pacific, who have got an unbelievably good brand, then you want to know about it. And you want to know what price they're charging, what components go in there, what the advertising was like. If you don't buy it, you're not going to know. If you're not going to know, you can't learn from it. If you can't learn from it, you can't improve. Okay, so you don't have to, but I would strongly suggest that that would be a good use of your money. Right, okay, so marketing. So the only thing you've got to do in marketing at the moment, and this starts to get quite complicated over time, is brand management. Now this is where you actually start to design your brand. You can't build them because you haven't got a factory. Okay, it's like crimping your plans there, but you can at least start to design your brands. And what you've got here for the first 2 of these components are really just a copy of what you saw in the market research. It just kind of makes it easier for you to reference it rather than having to go back to market research. So those 2 things, customer need and use pattern, is saying, right, okay, if you want to build stuff, look at this, and that will help you to understand what it is that needs to go in there. Now, component changeover, this, for some reason, is more complex than it actually is. I mean, as in people make it more complex. Imagine in your factory, it's still a very inefficient place to start with, okay? You're not really kind of working at full capacity. You're still working out how to do stuff. You're building 2 brands, and you can't build 2 brands at the same time. The game just says, no, you can't do that. You build 1 brand at a time. You probably get to a stage where you've built enough of those, and then you move over and start building the next brand. But to move from stopping building 1 brand to the next brand takes your factory a certain amount of time to set up and a certain amount of money to set up to build that second brand. Now, what this says here is, okay, these are the components that you'll be putting into your brands. And each time you add in one of these components that wasn't in the first brand, it's going to take you, in the case of, let's say, Case, okay, it's going to take you 5 hours, and it's going to cost you $1,000 to move from that brand that didn't have a case to that brand that did. So all we're saying is, in the early stages, it's going to be quite heavy in terms of overheads building 2 brands. If you've only got 1, you haven't got this problem. Okay, so again, look at in the micro simulations when it comes to it, and you'll see what changeover actually means. So I say, right, I'm going to stop building brand A because I've got 200 of those. I'm going to start building brand B, and there's going to be a time cost, and there's going to be a physical, financial cost in starting to build that one. And when I stop building that one and come back to this one again, the same thing applies. So what that says is, the more similar your brands are, the less this is going to matter. So typically, if you build a Cost Cutter and a Mercedes, they are very different beasts. And it's going to cost you a lot of time and effort and money to stop building that one and start building that one. So what I would suggest you do, is if you're going to build two that are similar-ish. So Cost Cutter, Workhorse and Traveller, because they tend to sort of want more or less the same kinds of things. Okay? Anything, look at the help. There is huge amounts of help on this game, and we really want you to look at this before you ask us questions, because it just makes you more self-sufficient. Okay? Right, anyway, we'll come back to changeover, because we'll get a sense of that when we actually start building the factory and start building brands. Okay, design a brand. So, of course, you've got nothing. And I'm going to start building a brand, which I'll delete. Okay? So I'm going to design a new one. What do I call it? What you call it doesn't matter yet. I'm going to call it the THFC Super X. Okay? Do I want it to be a desktop or a laptop? Now that matters. What happens if you build a brand for a Traveller that's a desktop? You'll get a lot of very unhappy people with bad backs carrying around something the size of this onto a train or a plane. All right, so just think about it. If you have, let's say, a Traveller brand and you make it a desktop, then really, you missed the point here. Having said that, for something like Mercedes or Innovator or Cost Cutter or Workhorse, you've got to ask yourself a question. Okay, obviously, it could be either, because they would probably use both. Look and see how important portability is to that segment to determine which of those two we go for. You might say, look, I don't know, it's kind of halfway. What does that mean? They do or they don't want a laptop? Build one of each. That might be the best way of doing it. I'm going to build a desktop. Okay? And you can see that it will actually cost you $60,000 to design this brand. And that's completely separate from all the components that go into that brand. Okay? So you're paying $60,000 to your designers to actually design this for you. Okay? So what you need to do then is tick or check some of these boxes to add in the various things you think they want. In some cases, you've got no choice. So clearly you need a case, you need all the base components like the CPU and the the main motherboard and all that kind of stuff. But in terms of things like hard drive, well, I don't know, how important is that? Go and look at the needs and wants. It may not be easy to determine whether they want high capacity or an ultra capacity or what. Okay, so I'm going to tick one of those, I'm going to tick that, I'm going to have a great big monitor, reasonable power, because I think they want power. And again, I'm going to try and work out where that is highlighted in the customer needs. Auto backup, do I want that? I don't know, let's try it. So there's my very first brand, okay? And that's my THFC Super X. So I can save that, and that will be ready to start building when the factory is up and running next quarter. Because it takes one full quarter to either build something or increase the capacity of something. I'll delete that, okay? Because otherwise... Okay. So that's your brand. If I were you, if you can afford it, I'd build two. Two different ones, two segments, two of the same but different components. Up to you. What I would say is the market research that you get, not now, because of course, the only way you're going to see your competitors' brands are where they start appearing on the market. Where they're still in the lab being designed, you cannot see what they're designing, unless you actually physically, go and stand behind them in the lab. Okay, so you're not going to be able to find out what they're building until they've actually started selling it, and then you can find out the cost. You can find out the response from the market in terms of do they like it. You can find out what components go in there, all of that kind of stuff. We don't normally encourage you to plagiarize, okay? And obviously, if you do it in your written piece, then we'll probably fail you. But in the case of copying from your competitors, go for it, okay? Because everybody else does. Apple, for instance, were accused of that. So, it happens. So don't be afraid to just say, I like your brand. I'm actually selling mine in a different region. I'm going to copy your brand and start selling it under my name in a different region. Fine. Okay. So really it's about just learning what works and what doesn't. Okay. Sales channel. So again, you've got the repeat of the demand for over 12 months. But that is way more than any of you are going to reach at this early stage. Later on, you might sell 10,000 by yourself in Chicago or Mexico. Okay, but at the moment you won't. So, sales offices and web offices. So the sales offices are physical bricks and mortar offices that you put in a city. So I'm going to go for, let's say, Mexico. I'm going to go for Warsaw. And I'm going to maybe build, here we are, open the sales office. Where am I going to open it? Well, I'm just going to modify and I'm going to just tick, here we are, Warsaw. Okay, it's going to cost me, you can see here, 110,331 to actually build the thing. And each quarter that it's open, it's going to cost me $46,138. Okay, so those are costs you need to take into account. And once you've committed to this, this should start to appear in your pro forma accounting. Or as you start spending stuff, it should automatically start appearing in your pro forma accounting to say, this is how much you spent, this is how much you're getting in, and that might help you to determine, for instance, how much you put in your deposit account at the end. Because it's still safe at this quarter, okay? So let me just check. Somebody seems to want to contact me, but all of you can just go away. Right, good. So that's the sales offices. You could instead, or as well, open a web office. Now, don't forget, you've got this strange kind of issue where PCs don't really exist yet, but the internet does. I know it doesn't seem logical, but just go with it. So web offices don't sell to a city, they sell to an entire region. Okay, so if I set up a web office in Europe, it sells to London, Paris, Warsaw, and whichever other place whose name I've completely forgotten. Anyway, it doesn't matter, but it will sell to all of those. What I would say about the internet in the early stages of this game is that it is very, very basic. So if you're expecting great sales with the web now, you're going to be disappointed. But if you bear with it and invest money in improvements, it will dramatically overtake the capacity of your sales office later on in the game. So some teams open up a web office and say, oh, that was rubbish. You know, really? I sold 10 in one. Well, that's fine. Okay. But we understand that. And that's a slow thing. It will get better and better. So somebody asked me last lecture, can we just close sales offices? You can close a sales office. You can close a web office. It will cost you money. But you might just want to have a bit of faith and just, you know, play the long game. So what I would say is, whatever you do, please open at least one office, whether it's a sales office or a web office. Otherwise, I can guarantee what your sales are going to be next quarter, 0. Okay? You can't sell anything without at least one of these. My preference would be a sales office, maybe plus a web office, personally, but, you know, what do I know? Human resources, again, because you haven't got anybody apart from your designers and you don't worry about them, the only people you have to worry about paying are your salespeople and your factory workers. And you don't need those yet because you haven't got a sales office or a factory. So we can forget that for the time being. Manufacturing is actually, later on, the most complicated thing. But once you understand the basics, it's actually quite straightforward. But it requires you to use the simulation that's here and just keep going and going and going until you get something that you think looks good. So that's another theory that we'll be talking about, or Tony will talk about on Monday, which is the concept of satisficing. Do you know what satisficing is? You marketing people? So if you work on the assumption that we don't know what the best decision is because we don't have full information. So I could just spend weeks and weeks doing simulations and actually working out what is the most optimal solution. But of course, human beings don't have A, the mental capacity for that, and B, the time very often. So they choose something that looks good enough. It's what's called satisficing. Oh, that looks good enough. That'll do. And that's something we just have to accept will have to happen in this game. Okay? It's what happens in real life. So, but it's a concept that I just thought you'd need to know about, but that will be something that potentially you might want to discuss or have to discuss in your coursework. Okay, right, so 2 things you've got to do. 1, you've got to build a factory somewhere. It's either going to be in Mexico, Johannesburg, Sao Paulo, Warsaw, or Shanghai. Those are the only places you can have it. And once it's there, then that's where it stays. You can see down the right-hand side here, these numbers, which tell you the relative expense of having a factory in that city. And here you can see the shipping costs. And again, I wouldn't start going into too much detail. Don't start doing statistical analysis on this because it really is only kind of estimates of, from North America, if your factory's in North America, clearly it's going to be cheaper to sell your brands to your sales offices in North America because it's closer, but more expensive for somewhere like the Middle East and Asia, and Africa, sorry, okay? But again, I don't think that really matters. It might matter in the early stages, but ultimately, if you've got sales offices everywhere, wherever your factory is, it'll average out, okay? But people tend to go where it's cheap, but it's fine. If your brands are good, that won't stop you from winning the game. So, open a factory. The reason I say that is because some people think, I can save money by not. You can, absolutely. You will save a lot more because you won't have to spend money on wages because you won't have a factory or any salespeople to sell anything. So open a factory, okay? You don't have to, but I would strongly suggest that if you don't, you will not win the game. In terms of the fixed capacity, yes. No, just one. So it's a good question, but no, you can't. So what will happen is, let's say, open your factory in Mexico City, okay? And you will do what's called, or set a capacity, which says, look, at the moment, we don't think there's much demand out there, so we're going to just have a factory and give it the smallest capacity that we can to actually build something. Okay, and that capacity will be 25. You could afford 50, but you don't need 50. There's no way you're going to sell 50. And by 50, what that means is the factory could build 50 units per day for all the working days in that quarter. But you're not going to need that because there's no way you're going to sell 50 times whatever the number of days is. 100, no, I don't know, what is it, 60 or whatever, okay, 90. So if I were you, I would go with 25. Because what the game will do, if it says you've got a massive factory and a tiny amount of it is being used to build stuff, we're going to give you a financial penalty for that. It's asset management. And that will count against you in your overall score. So 25 is what you need. You could go for 50, but that's an extra $500,000 that you're spending that could be spent on other things like brands, okay, or just spending it later on, okay? So entirely up to you. So one of the things I should say now is that although my factory here is 25 a day, it's not going to build 25 a day because of various inefficiencies, changeover, okay? If there was no changeover time and cost, I could build 25 a day. However, if I've got two brands that are quite different, I'm going to lose probably about 8 or 9 of that where the factory is sitting doing nothing because they're spending time changing over. So you're more likely to have a capacity of about 15 or 16, okay? So 25 doesn't mean 25. But you can invest money in research and development to improve the efficiency of your factory, to reduce changeover. So eventually your factory will be a much more efficient place. I'm going to cancel that, okay? So 25. Honestly, don't set it at 0. Just don't. Okay, so that's pretty much it for this quarter. I'll show you some of the stuff that happens next quarter, and just so you can understand what that means. So cash flow, now you can start seeing that this is the pro forma. This is basically what would happen if the figures that have gone into your accounting statements are correct. Now, in terms of what you spend, those will be correct for the most part. The thing that you have to worry about is when you start having revenues coming in, those are only estimates based upon what you think is going to happen. Which is why if it says, oh, look, it reckons we've got $500,000 cash at the end of the period that we're not using. Great, I'll stick that in my deposit account. What it's saying is, if your figures are correct, that's what you'll have left. But they won't be, because again, you're still learning, okay? But at this particular quarter, there are no revenues other than the guaranteed $1 million you're getting in. So it's, again, it's a fairly safe place to invest the spare money in the deposit account. Okay, so that's a blank canvas until you start, spending money, and then it will start to appear in that column. If it doesn't, do what you did before, go down to the bottom. There should be a button for modify, load data, and save, and that should then load all those figures in. Okay? So, income statement, exactly the same. Balance sheet, the same. So again, retained earnings, pretty poor, but that's fine. Finance, we talked about the certificate of deposit. If you've got any money at the end that you want to put in here, it's safe. It's the last quarter I recommend you do this, if you want to do it at all. Okay? Because there's no risk. So, do what you want to do, that's fine. Closely held stock, automatically done. That's the extra $1 million you get in for selling 10,000 shares to your grandmother or whoever it is that's giving you the money. The mafia, whoever else you want to go and talk to. Exchange rates, have a look at this and have a look at the help on this. Again, I don't think this makes a massive difference. I really don't. But if you want to know how to interpret what's in the news, the industry news, then have a look at this. But I really don't think it makes a great deal of difference. I really don't. Payment to business partners, just don't. really. If I could disable this, I would, because there's no need for you to do this. Now, what may happen in future, as I said, is somebody says, look, we're a bit short on money. We'd love to be able to have market research for all of those regions, but we can't afford it. So can I give you lot $20,000 and you can give me the market research from Africa and Asia Pacific? They say, yeah, we'll do that. So we can pay it through this, but don't guarantee that what you get is an honest account of market research. I could easily just change it and then sell it to you and completely mess up your strategy. So don't do that. Okay, summary decisions. Well, again, there aren't any. Final check. Okay, it's in red, which means you haven't done any stuff, and that's fine because we know that, okay? But you will almost certainly at some point get messages from Consumer Union, like a little badge with that sort of thing in yellow saying, you do realize if you do this, this may happen. And it's not saying that you can't do it, it's just saying it wouldn't recommend it. Okay, so submit, obviously you won't want to submit just yet. Additional decisions. Well, this is where you can actually change some of the things that you decided last quarter. Company name, but I wouldn't. Although if you do, maybe now is the time to do it. Team norms, you can change them if you wanted to, because you've realized that the way you're going to make decisions is not optimal. Responsibilities, you can change those because someone turns out to be a rubbish accountant, but a much better marketeer. And your personal goals have changed for whatever reason. So you can change those, but there's no need to, you don't have to. I talked about the brand name as being important. What I would say is, it doesn't matter what you call it, but as you go through and improve it and call it the THFC Super X version 1, version 2, version 3, if you keep the name of the brand 60% the same as the old one, then the consumers have brand recognition. They say, oh, that must be an improved version of the old one. If you change it to something totally different, like Arsenal X2, they're going to say, what is that? Is it something totally different? We don't understand it. We're not going to buy that. We don't know what it is. So you can get some kind of brand recognition in the game. Okay, right, so good chance now to answer any questions that you've got, and then I'll just go through a little bit of what you might see next quarter, just to give you a kind of sense of where we're taking this. Anybody got any questions? You've got until tomorrow. I think the lecture tomorrow is 3 o'clock, and then you've got until Friday to submit. There really isn't a great deal that you have to do, okay? And again, don't worry about getting it right, because you almost certainly won't. Just build a factory and a sales office and at least one brand, and then you're ready to go in quarter 3 and start selling. Okay? So this is only kind of setting the whole thing up. Any questions? Yes? As much as you can afford. I suspect you probably can't afford more than 2. And you might say, let's just do 1, see how things go, and we can then start to invest the other $1 million we get next quarter in more. I mean, you could have 1 sales office, 1 web office, you could have 2 web offices, you could have 2 sales offices, but you may find that you're then starting to reach the limits of your financial means, okay? But there's no limit, really, only what you can afford, okay? Yeah. Okay, so it's not something you have to worry about just yet, but you've got to look for the difference in that brand and that brand, all the components of the brand you're making second. You look at that table and work out how long it will take you to stop building that one and start building that one, and how much it will cost for the factory to be set up to stop building that one and that one. It's the difference in them. Okay? Sorry? No, what it will do is it will tell you, when you start doing your factory simulation, it will say, if what you're doing is how it will actually work in reality, and I'll explain that next quarter, then this is what the changeover cost and the time will be. It will give you a wealth of information about what your factory is going to do, how long it spends producing, how long it spends doing nothing. So we'll explain that honestly, okay? It'll be something that will be in the micro simulations under let's have a look. What is it? What do they call it? Let's just go back to the excuse me a second. Yeah, there's one on production scheduling. Okay, that will explain it. But again, I will be happy to explain it, because during the labs, at least, because that I think it's the most complicated bit. But once you get the hang of it, it's fine. But I won't explain it now because you don't need it now. And I think you've probably got more than enough to start thinking about. Okay, any other questions? Okay, right, well, that's what I'm going to do now then, is to just get out of that one. I'm going to go to, I'm going to choose a game from the past. Not necessarily a very good one. Let's go with a team that did well, actually. Oh no, look, Halo. I'm going to choose the old Halo, not yours, the old one, who did okay. They did okay, but not spectacular. And I'm just going to share that with the people online so they don't feel forgotten about. Final results, there we go. I'm going to move back to quarter two. Oh, actually quarter three. Okay, so this is a team from 3 years ago, I think, 2019-20. Okay, what's happened? Okay, so here, in fact, might be quarter four I need. Here is where they've designed some brands. Okay, so they've got their brands. They've got 3 brands, okay, which they designed in quarter two. And next quarter, they're going to have to start thinking about pricing. So here we've got the pricing market research we've already looked at. And here is where we say, right, firstly, do I wish to make that brand available for sale? Yes, I do. Otherwise, I'm not going to sell it. What's my price going to be? Well, that is something I will decide based upon the market research. And I can start giving discounts, rebates to consumers as a kind of incentive to buy my brand. So that's something that you'll think about next quarter. Okay, and then, of course, we've got to design adverts. So no one's going to buy your brand unless you go out there and advertise and tell them how great your brands are. So here they've got 2 adverts. Okay, and you can see that what they've got is they've got a variety of things, a bit like in your brand. You can put things in. Here you put things into the advert. So that's what you have to think about next quarter, okay, and work out whether or not you want to place it in cities. So that's if you've got a sales office, you want to advertise in the city, or if you've got a web office, you want to advertise it more generally in that region. So here, for instance, there's a variety of media, regional media, that you could choose from. Now, you might say, well, I don't know which to go for. Well, go and find out from your market research where the segment that you're after, for instance, let's say Traveller, what sort of media they look at. If they look at things like computer magazines and science and technology, that's probably where you ought to be advertising. Don't put it in, I don't know, sports magazines or leisure and entertainment, because maybe they don't read those. So that, again, that's a decision you have to start thinking about it. And the game's actually quite good in that it says, you're claiming things in the adverts which may not be true, in which case it will tell you you can't say that. So you might say, well, of course, we are the lowest price of any of our competitors. And it says, no, you're not. Or we sell to the entire region. No, you don't, because you haven't got a web office. And you've only got one sales office in Warsaw, not in Paris, not in London. So these are things, again, that you've got to think about. But move on to quarter four, which is when the first time you get the results back from the first things that you sell, you then start getting judgments back from your consumers. Okay? So it tells you things like the profitability. It tells you about, and this is the important bit, brand judgment. Okay? So for each of your brands, it gives you a judgment for what all of the segments thought about it. It doesn't matter whether you said, I don't care about Mercedes, it was supposed to be a cost cutter, but you still get a response back. Sometimes it just tells you what you already know. That was a monumentally awful Mercedes. Sometimes it says, do you know what, the Traveller segment loved your PC a lot more than the segment you aimed it at. So here, for instance, you've got the company Neath and their Stallion, which tells me it's a workhorse, although it's impossible to actually tell for sure. And the first brand judgment they got was 72, which is phenomenally good. In these early stages, if you get somewhere over 60, you're doing well. Over 70, you're doing spectacularly. Okay? But the cost cutter customers quite liked it as well. 68 is still a good score. And that tells you that maybe that wouldn't have been a bad cost cutter. Now the Bellator, I don't know what that was, or whatever it was awful. All right, rubbish, all of it. Anything below 60, basically get rid of it, start again with another brand. Okay, so it was the world's worst Traveller, it was the world's worst Mercedes, it was pretty apocalyptically bad as a cost cutter and a workhorse, and just dreadful as an innovator. But again, you know, if you only sort of get 60s, you're learning something. And if I were you, I'd be saying, if I go and look at my competitor Neath and work out what's in their Stallion, all right, I'm going to look at what's in their Stallion because I think that would be really good. There we are. Where are we? Neath, the Stallion. It will tell me what's in there. Okay, I'm not going to show you that because you'll just take pictures. Okay, so, but that's what you'll be able to see in the future. And of course, then you can say, right, that brand was all, but let's stop building that brand, start building and designing new brands. And, you know, so each quarter, if you're designing new brands, then you've got a capacity to keep your competitive advantage over everybody else. If you just stand still, they'll just race past you. Pricing. The price judgment, the same principle, but it works slightly differently. As I've said, if you look here, Neath, the Stallion, okay, we know that was a workhorse because of the name of it. And as a price judgment of 99 or 98 or 97 says, good price. They liked your price. If you get a price judgment of 100, they're saying, we liked your price. We would be willing to pay more, potentially. So the cost cutter and the workhorse, they care about low prices. So if you raise the price of those too much, they may say, no, too much. For Mercedes and innovators, they're quite price elastic. They're saying, we don't really care about money. We can afford it. Okay, so you might want to think about that when you start modifying the price. So a price judgment of 99 is absolutely, you got the price dead right. Okay, so down here, look, TechMaster and their Tech Portable, which we don't know what that was. It probably is a Traveller if it's portable. All we know is that price in Europe would have been a fantastic workhorse price. So again, you get this if you buy market research in Europe. Now these guys bought market research everywhere, so they're learning about what went on in the entire world. If you didn't buy it in Europe, then that bit is not going to be available to you and you're not going to learn. Okay? The last thing before I sort of just say, right, off you go and do what you need to do, is the same thing for advertising. Okay, so we call it the ad copy judgment. Same principle. If you get above 70, your advert is good. Any higher than that, you're doing spectacularly well. So the Neath, the Stallion, well, these guys did well. Look here, their Stallion, their advert for the Stallion got a score of 74, which means brilliant, but it could be improved. Okay, so if you get a score of, I think, less than 70, you'll get, let's have a look. Do they have them here? Sometimes they have, okay, yeah, you'll get like a summary saying, this advert was rubbish, get rid of it and start again. If it's under 70, get rid of it. Okay, so I'm going a bit ahead here, but I just wanted you to see what you might see once you start selling and getting feedback from the market. But at the moment, all you've got to do really is to worry about manufacturing, build a factory, give it a fixed capacity of 25 or 50, 25, and then build at least one sales office. Okay, you don't have to worry about manning those sales offices or factories because it takes one full quarter for that factory or sales office to be built. Okay, so I think that's as much as I need to say. I mean, I could just stand here and repeat this, but I can't see much value in that. So are you happy that you know pretty much what you need to do? Because you've got until Friday, but tomorrow you can come back and ask me any last minute questions. But really, there shouldn't be any kind of great complexity at this stage. But having said that, I've done this the last 12 years, so I probably know it more than most. Okay, and don't forget, submit, okay? Otherwise, it will start getting expensive. Okay, so thank you to those people online. I hope that made sense. If you've got any questions, then it's a good time to ask them now. Yeah.
So we have to write like a.
Yes, at the end. At the end.
What's the deadline for this? Because
August.
So
We'll talk about that on Monday. So that's what Tony Polak's going to talk about that. I'll actually make it available to you because there's no reason why you can't look at it now. But what I said is that if you think, well, I could write it now, you know, after quarter four, because ultimately I could just choose some decisions that we've taken in the first 4 quarters as my example of what went wrong, what I should have done. There's no reason why you need to wait until the very end.
we will learn some kind of theory.
Yes,
about
next week.
this.
And I've got loads of stuff on Rise as well, which is this app that has loads of theories that you can bring in, like Hofstede, like satisficing, like bounded rationality, all that kind of stuff. I just wanted you to understand the game before we started moving into theory. Okay? So I think you were next. Yeah, hi there.
I was from Summit.
Yeah, you were fine. Yeah.
Yeah, that's because like the person who relogged in and like the changes and missing, the person didn't participate in any of the discussion. It's
Okay.
like only 3 of the members were active and we were.
Well, but you need to get you need to understand that I can't have one rogue person in a team and say, okay, I'll just kind of remove the fine. So you just have to say to that person, you know, the team must be responsible for agreeing when to submit.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not going to undo the fine, but I think it's not going to be a massive problem. But you just need to make sure that maybe your team leader
I'm the leader.
says, right, I'm the one that's going to submit, just
Yeah,
to make
I
sure.
already said that
Yeah.
and we had that discussion and then the person went and did it like without consulting me.
Okay, can you, okay, email me and let me know who it is, and I'll
Yeah.
just say, look, there are rules in this, and you can't just do this, otherwise you're going to lose
Yeah, but then it's
$400,000.
sabotage.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's the way it is. It's the problem with working in a team.
But since it's like a huge loss and the person that participates.
I can't do anything about it. I won't. I'm sorry. It's just the way it is, and I have to be fair to everybody. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Right. Hang on a second. I just need to. So, guys, just let you know there is no QR code for this lecture for some reason. So everybody is here. Hello.
We have some questions for you because we have already submitted on time, but our group is
So-
any final
So
step.
somebody. Okay. So go up.
Yeah, we didn't modify anything. Just few, and we still have the 2,000 slides.
Hold up. Hang on a second. Oh, one. I would have checked because the game will show me
Yeah.
if you've submitted, and if you haven't, it's because something here. Let's have a look. So page 1. So when was this? It was yesterday. How bizarre. So let's have a look. That was the last. That was yesterday at. I don't understand that. That's. Sorry, I keep doing this, don't I? Okay. Oh, okay. I'm not used to this. Okay. Let's have a look. So. 20th. So what's the date today? The date today is the 22nd. That's the 21st we're looking for, isn't it? I don't understand what's going on here then. Because it listed it as not having been submitted. You see, so the last thing is somebody has submitted. That's good.
Yes, I
And then you looked at it.
Yes.
Okay.
And also it failed. We did not find anything.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
And we still have minus.
Okay. Well, so what I'll do is I can see that there's something that's gone wrong here. I can put that money back in. It's not a problem. But what will have happened is I can't really show you it because of course it's gone past that stage. But it's going to stop recording.